Hi, I'm Lauren.
And I'm Callie.
And this is the BookCommonRoom podcast. Hi, welcome back to another episode of the BookCommonRoom podcast. We're so happy for you guys to join us. Today, we're
hold on. Elephant in the room. Do we sound better?
Oh, yes. I sure hope so.
I hope we sound better. I hope we have no issues.
I hope you don't get any inserts of us
going, hi, it's us. It's been...
This is like voiceover Callie.
Every
voiceover Lauren.
editing Callie and editing Lauren. Hopefully, there's no misinformation.
Yes.
And there's no sound issues.
Yes.
I'm putting out in the interview into the universe, not jinxing it.
Yes. Well, I felt so bad because when we did our Jane Eyre episode, I had said that like this term and publication of Jane Eyre was like 1937. I meant 1837 in my brain. I thought I had said that.
I didn't catch it when I was editing it.
Yeah, so I did put a little mention on YouTube and Instagram about that. Yeah, I messed that up, y'all. But
totally chill.
But
totally
anyways, ACOTAR is a little bit chiller of a book that we're going to be talking about today.
We're doing ACOTAR.
So we're doing ACOTAR for the month of September, which you all knew, and we're also doing it with our new schedule, which is gives our audience more time to read. So this episode is going to be non-spoiler. We're just going to be talking about the book, its cultural impact, and just like what makes literature good or bad, and what does that conversation kind of entail.
Yeah, we felt like we'd announce the book the first day of the month. You have a week to obtain it, whether you go to the library or whether you buy it yourself. And then we'll introduce the book to kind of get a conversation started, is my hope. So then, like if we were to do a classic book and you are just overwhelmed going into it, my hope is that we can introduce a topic. So you're reading it with not a purpose, but more of an understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
This one's just going to be fun. We're going to do a mix of all, but...
Yes. But I will say, so we're doing a Court of Thorns and Roses.
Yeah.
I always say Thrones. I always mix it up. It's a Court of Thrones. No, it's a Court of Thorns and Roses. And I was referenced to this book series a year ago. We only read the first two. Just so if you guys want to
you read all of them.
I've read all of them actually, but for the purposes of this podcast, Callie had only read the first two, just because it is a series, and I feel like it's hard to talk about the book if you don't talk about the second one, because I feel like the second one has important details.
Yeah.
Anyways, so for the purpose of this podcast, we will be mainly talking about non-spoilers in this one, and our next episode we'll be talking about the first two.
With spoilers. The juicy stuff.
But yes, so Callie, do you want to introduce the book for us?
Yeah, so A Court of Thorns and Roses is by author Sarah J. Maas. If you go on her website, I do think this is a little interesting. She puts it on there that she has sold 38 million copies, English worldwide, but it's published in 38 different languages. So this book is literally everywhere. If you haven't heard of this book, you're living under a rock.
Yes.
It's you can't go anywhere without either seeing it in a bookstore, seeing it on Instagram, TikTok. It's just kind of the book right now, which is interesting because it was published in 2015, right?
Yeah, it was a while ago. And for myself, I was introduced to Sarah J. Maas in high school with her series called Throne of Glass, which I love that series so much. It blew my mind. And we've talked about this before, but as fantasy goes, I was only into Percy Jackson and Harry Potter, and then I read this and I was like, whoa.
There's more out there.
There's more
a bigger world.
Yeah, it's really good. And there was romance. Throne of Glass is far more fantasy, politics than it is in ACOTAR. But that's how I was introduced to that author, and I really liked her because I could tell she was a Lord of the Rings nerd.
Yep.
And I love Lord of the Rings.
Throne of Glass influenced by Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
Did she write it?
Most of her writing
off
is
of that
too. Yeah, she loves Lord of the Rings. She loves Tolkien, and you can kind of tell that with her maps and her world building. But is it Tolkien? No.
No.
But you can tell that that he had an influence on her writing. But yeah, this is a book talk attention. It's everywhere. And what we mean by that is there's a sub-community on the app of TikTok, which I'm not on TikTok, but I didn't know that that's what it meant. But it focuses on books and literature, so like it's like a whole community on TikTok that like if there's a book going around, like people are just like, what is this all about? So they'll go and read it, and ACOTAR is one of those.
It's like the number one.
The number one.
It is the number one. Everybody has read it.
And like everyone and their spouses have read it.
Yep. It's moving on to the spouses.
Yeah, like there's so many videos of partners reading
like
them.
My husband
or my wife, and it's just like my partner, and it's just so funny because I don't know. I love when people get into books.
Yep.
Especially couples. Like it's fun. But yeah, and so Sarah J. Maas has 3 main series out: Throne of Glass, A Court of Thorns and Roses, and then Crescent City or something like that. But
yeah,
those are her main books.
That's cool. Yeah, I do think it's interesting that almost 10 years later, it's gotten re-popular again. Because I remember when you and a couple of our other high school friends were reading Throne of Glass, loved it, and I couldn't get past the first book. And so I didn't ever read it, and then ACOTAR came out, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll like this one. And then I kind of had the same issue at the beginning, so I distinctly remember the old covers too.
Yeah.
And
the way she looked, I forgot
with a
about
red
those.
cover,
Yes.
and she had like a black, like almost like a bodysuit on.
She always looks like a vampire.
Yeah. And I'm actually kind of sad I owned that original copy, and I think I gave it away.
Oh, interesting.
But it's being like people are buying those copies for a lot of money.
They are. They're still in like the library for Throne of Glass because Throne of Glass was young adult fiction. No.
So the first one I think was technically classified as YA. But then the later book, she added more smut, so it became adult.
But they had it in the library, and like as like a high schooler, I would skip those scenes because I was like, I don't care about this. But it was just interesting because I do remember reading that, and then ACOTAR, I could tell that her writing, she was better at pacing, but there was far more smut in ACOTAR, and I was like, oh, this is why everyone loves this.
Yeah.
Like everybody just likes the smut, but balanced
the elephant
with, like,
in the room, it's so bad. Can I just say that?
In ACOTAR?
Yeah. Like the smut, the verbiage that she uses cracks me up.
You know what's
like
funny? I don't
it,
even know because I feel like half the time I like skip it.
Oh, I read it. I was like, I'm reading it and I'm like, why would she use that word to describe things? I'm like, what is happening? So I was cackling as I'm reading that.
I don't know. Like, I feel like sometimes when the book in itself can use language that you're just like, why describe it that way? All the time. And I think the reason why is because it's supposed to like take place in like and I don't think this makes sense to me, but it's like you're in a different world. It's archaic, and so they're just going to describe things almost like animalistic sometimes. Yeah. And so I'm like, interesting. And so like there are smut scenes later in ACOTAR that I felt like were actually kind of tender, but it was because like it's only between characters who actually care about each other. And then if you get characters that don't really care about each other and you have smut scenes, it's gonna be weird.
Yeah.
Like the last book of this series especially, I was like, I can't handle this.
Again?
To each their own. But I guess like what it really comes down to for us is like this book was heavily popularized, and like for me, like all you had is I just tapped the mic, so sorry about that. But for me, it was like reframing the Beauty and the Beast for the first book. I was like, okay, you got me.
Yep.
You got me. I'll read that. I will read it and see how I like it. So a lot of people got hooked with that. But then, yeah, again, it's like raved all over the world. Is it a good book? Is it a bad book?
Yeah, like, it's very polarized.
You know?
Even though it's really popular, it seems like people either love it, and even they might recognize that it's not the best thing ever written, but they'll still love it. And then there's the person on the other end who just can't stand it, who hates it, and just loves to hate on it. Yeah. There's really no in between, and it's just a constant back and forth, which I think is interesting. Because this isn't the first instance that this has happened. No. Like, there's so many instances where people will claim something's a bad book. Like, oh, why are people reading Twilight? Yes. That's a bad book, but it's so popular.
So popular. And so I think that just goes to show that cultural impact of books isn't always dependent on it being subjectively, I mean, objectively good or bad. But that's the other thing, is like, the conversation is subjective. Like, you can't, I don't know. Like, so we kind of want to talk about that today. We
want to see if we can tackle, is there such thing as a bad book?
Which I think there is.
Air quotes. I think there is too.
I think there are bad books out there in the sense that, like, it does more harm to you than it does good.
The influence is negative.
And...
Or if you read anything that I've written, it's just badly written. So that's just bad.
So that's just bad. And that's why it's interesting, because there are culturally impactful books that are just badly written. But, like, people love it. And so that's, I don't know, it's so interesting. It just goes to show that once a book is out of the author's hands, it really is, like, up to the readers to, like, put it on a pedestal or to trash on it, even if it could be good. But
besides ACOTAR, do you have a book that you feel like you could claim as a bad book, but you still love it?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Besides ACOTAR, since we don't want to do spoilers for that
I think is just, like, badly written, but I love it. I'm sure if I went to my bookshelf, I would, like,
you'd be like, that one.
something so fast. I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that. Is there anything on your mind that you're thinking of?
100%. The Selection series.
I
loved.
Never read those.
Don't. I loved the Selection series. I read it. I had to have been in middle school. Yeah, either like a freshman in high school or like later in middle school I read them, and I ate those up.
Oh man, I ate this book series.
They were so fun. I thought they were so fun. And one of our friends, after I had read it, she read it. She comes up to me. She's like, I can't stand America, the main character. She's the worst. I'm like, what are you talking about? I love it. So the Selection basically is this. It's basically like The Bachelor. So the prince has to pick out of these women someone to marry. And they kind of do competitions-y type stuff to then figure out who he's going to marry. So it's like, people explain it's like The Bachelor meets The Hunger Games. Because it's a dystopian world.
Yeah.
It's bad.
You know what?
But
That's crazy. Like,
I have it on my bookshelf at home, and my sister was going through it the other day, like, why do you have the Selection series? I'm like, because I loved it.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, too, is it's like, that's the other, like, subjective thing, too. It's like, you can know something's bad, but know that it made you happy.
Yeah.
It, like, helped you get through a hard time.
I think I read the whole series in, like, 2 days.
Yeah. I like it when audiences treat me like I'm intelligent.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, authors, like, treat their audiences that, like, they have a brain. They don't have to tell us everything.
Yeah.
And because, like, we can figure things out. Like, and I felt like Percy Jackson. I love Percy Jackson. I still will read it. But, like, you just have to kind of realize, like, who was this author writing it for? Was it for kids? Was it for adults? Like, and then I feel like you can be more, I don't know, balanced in how you judge bad writing and good writing. But since it was for kids, like, it's not going to be great writing. But even for kids, I'm like, it could have been better. Like, the writing could have been better.
He's not the best writer in the world.
But I think, like, what hooked everybody was, like, Greek mythology and, like, also, like...
It's great character work.
It had these youth who had, like, ADHD and dyslexic and, like, made it a superpower.
Yeah.
Whereas instead of it being something that took away from the quality of your life, which I feel like I hate that, like, rhetoric that's used around that kind of... I don't know, because I'm like... Anyways... There's a whole argument within that itself. But he, like, gave them superpowers and, like, and they were special. And I thought that was so cool. But, yeah, like, as writing goes, it wasn't good writing.
No.
So I think you have to know, like, who did the author have in mind as the audience? But also, like, how are they treating the audience? And I feel like I can always tell, like, it's a good book if, like, I feel like the author had me in mind. I guess. Oh,
100%. And I think a lot of that comes down to it. When the author's Selection was probably writing her books, I don't know this, but I bet you I was the target audience. That age that I was, and I, at the time, loved watching The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, and I loved Hunger Games. And it was when all of those dystopian books were coming out, and that, I loved it. I ate it up. So I was the target audience, so it hit.
Yeah.
But I feel like with ACOTAR, I am now outside of the target audience. So when I try to read something like that,
yeah.
Consensus, spoiler alert, I didn't love it. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. It was my favorite.
It kind of broke my heart a little bit because I get notifications from Callie's Goodreads, and I was like, oh, she ranked it, and it was 2 out of 5, and I was like, oh, ouch, because ACOTAR was something. Like, as an English major, I think I know a lot of people, like, Callie has an incredible gift where, like, despite all that she's read in a semester, she can still just read, like, her own books. I can't do that. Like, I am reading, like, there was one semester I literally read 34 books for classes.
That's crazy.
And they weren't short little books. They were, like, books. And everyone was like, you need to just skim them. And I was like, I can't do that. Like, I just can't.
I don't get anything when I do that.
I truly, if I don't, like, I'm not taking notes, like, I feel like I'm not connected to the conversations we have, whatever. So I was reading a ton, and I just get burnt out, and I couldn't read books. And then I had a neighbor that was like, hey, there's this series by Sarah J. Maas that you're going to really like. And I was like, okay. Like, I've judged so many people for reading this book series. Like, I hardcore judged people that read ACOTAR and that series because I was like, they just, I don't know. Like, it's just smut, and it didn't feel like it was giving. To me, I thought it was a bad book. Yeah. I thought it was just, like, people are just obsessed with reading a bunch of books that have no substance to them. So I judged it, and I had a neighbor ask me to read it, and my neighbor had pretty good book taste. So I was like, okay. Yeah. She liked this, so I'll try it. And I tried it, and I ate it up. Like how you felt about the selection series. Even if you knew it was bad, like, you ate it up. I ate up ACOTAR, but I didn't think it was that bad either. Like, which we can go into later, which is totally fine. Like, but for me, it was escapism. Like, I didn't have to, like, have my brain constantly be thinking about what the author was trying to do, what its impact was. I could just sit and read and escape. And I loved it so much. I read it so fast. The last book was a hard one for me to get through. But the series, I just escaped into it. And I think that is the main thing where it's like, or keyword, where I use that book as like a form of escapism. Yeah. Which I think is fine. But the question is, like, should reading only ever be like that? You know?
That is a good question, because I do get in moods where I just want to read something that I can escape into. But then other times I'm like, oh, I now want to read something where I'm really going to have to sit and think, and I'm really going to gain something from it. Yeah. Versus just have a good time.
Yeah, exactly. And I also, like, related with the main character a lot, and a lot of people, like, I've talked to some people who don't like the main character, and Callie didn't really like Thera, which is fine. That's her main name, but there's, like, things about her that, I don't know, there were things that I was like, oh, she did the same thing I did, and then, like, in the second book, she learned from it. Yeah. And she, like, does this now, which are things that I've incorporated into my life. Like, for myself, I'm like very spontaneous sometimes, and then I'm like, wow, that was a really dumb decision. And then, like, now later in life, I feel like I'm far more introspective, more reflective on, like, oh, well, why am I doing it this way? Or like, and I just identified with her at that time, and so I loved that. And so for me, I felt like it was a good book because I found ways, like, where I could grow through this character, and I also, I don't know, it just was fun to just escape into a world I had never really read before.
Yeah, and I love that. Another reason that I honestly, this is weird to say, I was kind of happy I didn't like it, because then I feel like we can have, like, we're both sides of that argument.
So, like, if you guys are listening and some of you didn't like it or hated it, or some of you loved it and liked it, you could talk to
both audiences can watch this video and be heard. Yeah. Because we have both of it. So it's weird to say that I'm glad I didn't like it, but I'm kind of glad I didn't like it. Yeah. Because I'm now very excited to talk about it.
I also will preface, I went into this book series with low expectations, as I said. Yeah. I judged people for this. I thought it was so dumb. And then I read it and I was like, you know, this isn't that bad. Yeah. But again, like, I do think there are good books out there and bad books. And I think bad books are just the ones where it's like, it's taking more than it is giving.
What's an example of that?
I think, I don't know if I can give, like, a book example of it, but I feel like if you're reading a book and it kind of just, I don't know, this is going to be weird routes, but when I was reading about classical literature and we were going through, like, points in history when, like, the printing press was made and all of that, there was, like, this phase in time, I think they were called yellow books or something like that, and it was when because of the printing press, more people could read. They made reading more accessible for people. But because of that, people were just writing who had no understanding of the written language, or like they were just writing really poorly written stories that were like this. It was like, it would only be smut or things like that, and they were just publishing and publishing and publishing, and everyone was just, people who didn't have that much money would just read those so they could have something to read. But they weren't good.
Yeah.
And the reason they weren't good is because like it wasn't teaching them critical thinking, or it wasn't providing a way for someone to like, I don't know, really relate to a character, or really like connect, or like show empathy. Like they were books that were more of like to like consume, less of like, oh, like this produces these emotions, these produces these thoughts. And so I don't know, that's how I kind of take bad literature, is when it was just, it was written with consumption in mind.
Yeah.
And less of, I don't know, giving something.
Yeah. And this is such a tricky topic for me, because if you're gonna find something that you enjoy, like who are we to say anything about it? If that makes sense.
Like that's bad. That's
like,
bad book.
I do feel like we are allowed to have our own opinions about it and give our own thoughts. But I also think if someone has different thoughts and they like all of this stuff, who are we to say anything? However, we're still going to say what we think.
But the thing is also too, like you can't make everybody else feel that way too. Like if you are like, these are the kinds of books I like, you can't like objectively say that's how it should always be.
Yeah.
I mean, like, because we're knowing like this is from our personal experience, this is how we think, but bad books and good books can be viewed in an objective light, but it doesn't mean we expect everyone to think that way.
This is just how we view this conversation. But the whole thing about bad books, usually when I think about bad books, the number one genre that comes to my mind is dark romance, only because I feel like it does more bad, it introduces more bad narratives than good.
Exactly. Like and negative tropes. And we kind of talked about this a little bit well, not like this lens, but we've talked about a book that is dark romance before in our podcast, and it was Manacled, which a lot of people love.
Yeah.
People are obsessed with it. I actually got to a point where I was like, Callie, I think I need to try and read this. And Callie was like, okay, well, I'm going to give you everything that I know, so you have all the judgment and tools you need before you decide to read this book. And after she gave me everything, I was like, for myself, I decided not to read it.
Yeah.
But dark romance in itself doesn't sound like it would be bad.
No, it sounds like it would almost be if Mr. Darcy was just a little edgier. Or to me, it's like gothic. It would be like a gothic romance.
Because like we've read Rochester's and like Heathcliff's type characters, and they're problematic.
Yeah.
But you knew that.
Yeah, you understood like, oh, that person isn't good. This is dark. This is gothic. I feel like the dark romance that's getting written right now romanticizes
the problematic parts of Gothic literature.
Yeah.
And so, so we looked up like just a classic definition of dark romance. And dark romance is a subgenre of romance that explores themes that are much darker, grittier, and often more controversial than typical romance novels. Surface level, that sounds really good. Like, that sounds interesting. I think I'd be interested in that genre.
It could introduce topics like domestic violence, sexual assault. It could... I feel like
very triggering.
Yeah, things that people go through in real life, and they want to go into literature and find something that they can relate to, but does it in a way where like, yeah, that was bad, and the character did this to go through it or whatever.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and maybe what I need to do is like, maybe I should read it so I can really tell you like this is how it was for me. But like what we've noticed in dark romance is that it's romanticizing unhealthy relationships, abuse, violence. Like it's very polarizing. And some readers appreciate it for its complex narrative, but I think that you can do that in a way that's not so focused on the romance of those things that we find to be negative.
The number one book that comes to my mind that everybody that's on the internet's going to know is called Credence. Have you heard of this?
I thought you were going to say It Ends With Us, and I was like, that's not dark romance, but it does deal with hard things. Okay, I haven't heard about that.
You've never heard of Credence?
No.
Okay. There's this YouTuber, Carrie Can Read. I love her. She's amazing. Anyway, I didn't want to read Credence, the dark romance. I'm like, oh, that's not me. But I was so curious. I'm like, why do people like this? So she did a video that's basically like, I read it so you don't have to. I have to look her up.
Okay.
She puts pictures on the wall and has like, she's like, this character does this. And she goes through the whole story.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
like PowerPoint night, but like of books. That's funny.
I love it. It's awesome. But she basically goes through the whole story and it's horrible. This girl, her parents die, so she has to move in with her uncle and her cousin. And the whole romance is between her uncle and her cousin, but she goes with both of them at one point at the same time. Like, it's stuff like that where that's bad.
That's just not good.
No,
why would you
why would you
that?
how okay, if you loved it, I'm sorry, but I legit don't get it. Like, how can you think, oh, I'm going to write a romance book about someone who has gone through something super traumatic. We're going to send them off, and then we're going to make them go through other traumatic things that arguably is like sexual assault. Like, she just went through something traumatic. Maybe she can't consent as well as she should be able to.
She just can't find her voice.
Yeah, she can't find her voice. And so these, like, dudes just basically take advantage of her because they live in the mountains. So she basically couldn't leave. She was stuck there.
I, like, don't doubt that there are
like,
real-life
put that in the
experiences of
world.
that, but,
Yeah.
like, to read it in that kind of setting where it's, like, the tone is, like, not where it probably should be.
Yeah.
Like, it's not making that scene particularly into something that's not good.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not necessarily saying, like, I don't know, because, like, I also, this isn't dark romance, but I've loved this graphic novel series called Lore Olympus, and there's this mutual understanding between these two characters who have a sexual relationship, but they, like, don't care about each other all that much. Or one, like, cares a little too much, while the other one is like, well, we're just doing this because we're two broken people and we're lonely. That's what it was. But then both start to fall in love with other characters, particularly one character. I don't want to spoil it because I love that series, and we might be doing it in one of our podcasts. But one of the characters ends up really falling in love with this other character emotionally and just like intellectually, and everyone's like, well, that's cheating. But then people were like, well, is it? Because their relationship with the other person was mainly because they were two broken people and were lonely with no strings attached. So, like, is it? And so everyone was like, we know it was something that the author had led up to the audience to know, like, okay, this isn't good. But we know that this happens in real life. And so, like, I don't know, it doesn't romanticize it in a context where, like, this is good. And if it happened to you in real life, like, you wouldn't be afraid of it or be scared of something that could potentially put you in very dangerous situations.
Yeah, I feel like literature can do so much good. Someone could read Lore Olympus and then maybe begin a relationship that has something similar to that and recognize, oh, maybe this isn't good. I learned that from this book that I read. Versus, oh, I'm in a situation that's similar to a book that I read, and it was okay in the book, so it's okay in real life. But in reality, it's abuse.
Yeah.
But you don't recognize that because the book romanticized it.
And I think that's the key word too, because I feel like not authors aren't like responsible for teaching us morals or like how we should live our life. But I do think they need to be careful in like not romanticizing things that can get people hurt in like psychologically or like physically. And I think dark romance is like, I don't know, it is scary to me.
It is scary, yeah.
Some of the books that are in it. But if you guys have comments or thoughts with regards to dark romance and its genre, like, we'd love to hear it. But it's just been our experience of like what we've seen in like media with regards to dark romance genres. And like, I think we were talking about like you seeing 3 girls like at like a bookstore.
Barnes & Noble, yeah. Yeah, I looked over. 3 girls were perusing through romance. They had to have been like 14 max. Picking up these types of books that will just negatively influence them.
Yeah, and no one's there to be like, I don't know, like, I feel like authors, it's hard, like, to be responsible. Like, they're not supposed to be responsible in that way, but it is, like, I don't know, I always appreciated the books that did a good job of disclaiming, like, hey, this is going to be going into abuse, or like, hey, this is going to be going into this.
Like, if you want to write it and that's what you want to write, cool. Like, erotica has been written since the dawn of time. Yeah. Like, that's always existed. But I feel like in the past, there's always something to show what it's going to be. Like, it used to be you had, like, the shirtless man on the cover with the girl that's swooning. So you knew a good, going like,
bodice ripper. Yeah. That's why I heard people call them.
Yeah, no, it's true. So you would go in knowing what it was going to be, right? Mm-hmm. Now I feel like it's changing. Covers are a lot more discreet, sneaky, and people on TikTok or whatever are talking about how they love these books but not fully explaining what's in it. Mm-hmm. So I do think there just needs to be a level of write what you want to write. If, like, you're a consenting adult, cool, whatever. But think about the fact that maybe someone who's not or might be vulnerable, you need to put something on there that's like, hey, this is in it. And if that's, like, you're okay with it, go for it.
Yeah.
And if you like that, go for it. But there should be some sense of awareness.
I also think, like, books are so powerful because, like, they've influenced me so much, impacted me for both good, maybe in some ways bad. But it is interesting because, like, there can be a danger in, like, youth especially trying to discover themselves through media or through books like these.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, a lot of times books can, like, change your life. But, like, I feel like that whole dilemma is something I could spend, like, an hour talking about.
I know, and I guess we just love topics like this. I don't think there's a right answer.
Yeah.
Because, again, to play devil's advocate, it's no one's responsibility but the parents and whoever's going to pick up the book to research what they're reading.
Yeah.
It's not anybody else's role or job. It shouldn't be put on them to have to do that.
No, like, an author isn't going to do that because that's not what they're supposed to. They're writing maybe because they love it and also because, like, that's their source of income, whatever. But it is true. And so ACOTAR, like, I definitely wouldn't want my little sister to read. Mm-hmm. And my sister is, like, almost an adult.
Yeah.
And so I would rather her, like, wait because I do feel like there are, like, very, like, mature things that are easier to read when you're older and have, like, lived a little bit, I guess, more in the world. But I don't know. I don't feel like ACOTAR was a bad book for me, though.
Yeah. And I feel like on that topic, just, like, recognize the age group that you're going to be in. I definitely have gone to, like, a library and my mom's like, okay, here's your section. You're going to go to YA. Like, what is wrong with reading a YA romance if you're 12?
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with that? I don't see anything wrong with that. That's how I found the selection. Mm-hmm. Like, I wanted something that was kind of fun and romancy, so I went to YA. Mm-hmm. Here we are. Like, why do we have to be cool and go to, like, the adult section and read things?
That's what I wonder. So, exactly. That's, like, getting us into the topic of, like, I don't know, there's very stereotypical books that I feel like BookTok especially, like, will push. And it's particularly, and you mentioned this, where it's, like, girl books. Mm-hmm.
We're talking about a lot of things that could be considered girl books.
Yeah, which is, like, it is, like, a thing that TikTok talks about, like, girl book. Or, like, hot girl summer, book summer, whatever. Like, it's very gendered. Because, I don't know, like, what I've seen with regards to girl books, there tend to be, like, the romance, you know? They're, like, more feminine in that way. And people are very judgmental about that. Not just people, but just, like, critics in general. I feel it can be hard on, like, women with wanting to read romance. But I'm like, I grew up with a dad who studied English as their major, and my father loves Jane Austen.
I love that.
So, like, I grew up with him, like, sitting down and, like, watching Pride and Prejudice with us, Sense and Sensibility. Like, every time we have it on, he comes and sits and watches it with me and my mom and my siblings. And my brothers, we force them to watch these with us. But it's just interesting because it's very gendered, and I feel like there shouldn't be anything wrong with someone wanting to go to a YA fantasy section, no matter how old you are. I think it just really comes down to, like, are they aware of the content? If it's more intense, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that idea is interesting of how much of do people hate on these romance books because they're just considered girl books?
Yeah.
And not like cool, deep level
Like, it's
books.
not Dune.
It's not Dune or Brandon Sanderson or
even Robin Hobb.
Yeah.
Like, I've been hearing Robin Hobb a lot more recently, and I feel like people consider Robin Hobb to be more, like, almost, like, more accepted than if I was reading ACOTAR. Like, I'm reading ACOTAR, and I'm sure people will roll their eyes if they're more, like, academic or, like, sci-fi people. I don't know.
I'm that person. I apologize.
No, it's okay. Well, like,
I am the problem.
I do this. But I do think it's interesting because, like, it's people finding what they think to be good books versus bad books.
Yeah,
like,
it's so subjective.
It is incredibly subjective, and there isn't one way to think about it. In fact, I think everyone needs to think about what that means to them individually, because otherwise you get very polarized conversations where people don't understand how, like, fluid the conversation of good versus bad book is.
And just have the wherewithal to recognize who they're talking to.
Yeah.
Also, I think there needs to be a level of, if you've read something and you thought it was problematic or you didn't like it, and you're talking to someone who loves it, it's honestly kind of mean.
Yes.
To just be like, you liked that? Well, that was stupid. I'm going to tell you X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Like, to your face.
Yeah.
I do think that is a little harsh. Like, just let them love what they love.
Yes. And something that, like, a professor, I'm so sorry. Like, if it ever gets annoying that I, like, reference my school too much, it's literally just because
it's your life right now.
My life right now. But it helps me a lot because, I mean, we're English majors, so we're talking about books all the time. And writing and analyzing it all, which can be exhausting, which is why I find so much joy in escaping into books like ACOTAR.
Yeah.
But something that my professor had mentioned was that there is a level of disinterestedness everyone needs to approach life with in general, but especially, like, in the conversation of books, there needs to be a level of disinterestedness. Now, when I hear that word, it sounds like when you just hear it, disinterested, you think, oh, like, I don't know, when I first heard it, it just meant that you're kind of bored, or you like, but that's not, like, at all what he was talking about. Disinterestedness means, like, you have a quality of being objective and impartial, which is very hard to do. But it's like being able to approach, especially literature, and having, like, some form of, like, critical analysis, like approaching a text or subject with, like, an open mind. And focusing on, like, what qualities does it have. So you can be able to understand why people like things. And I think, honestly, objectively, that should be how we approach most conversations.
Yes.
Like, have an open mind. Why do they feel this way about these books? And so I think ACOTAR is incredibly polarizing, like you said. Like, either people hate it and will love hating on it, or people love it and love loving on it, which I do. Like, I love loving on it, and I love telling people about it because it really, I don't know, I just really enjoyed it, and I fell in love with the characters, and I wish I could write characters similar to her. I'm not that great at creative writing. And so I loved that because I'm really good about, like, academic papers and like pulling in, like, scholarly sources, but then you just get, like, a book, you can just, I don't know, it felt very equalizing when I read that book. It was very accessible to me, and I didn't have to think too hard about it, and I loved it. But I feel like on this podcast it works, and I really like how you don't like it as well, because we can approach this with disinterestedness, where it's like, okay, I understand, like, why this was kind of a turnoff for you.
Yeah.
But I do think generally that bad books exist out there, good books exist out there. And it's up to every person to be able to figure out what that means to them.
It's very individual.
But we just found dark romance to be a very strong example of something that we think negatively impacts, like, our community as culturally.
Yeah. And then also just, it comes down to personal taste too. That's just not my personal taste.
Yeah.
Like in ACOTAR, the smut scenes I thought were comical. Just straight up hilarious.
I agree.
And
for some of them, absolutely.
Like, I could not stop just cackling through some of them. But then I'm hearing about these other dark romance books that I've had, like, some friends read, and they'll describe it, and that just doesn't sound appealing to me. I don't get it, but some people, they, like, love it. Yeah. And that is, like, their shtick, and they get off on it. I'm like, you know what? have fun.
Yeah. But it's interesting. And, like, I don't know. I think cultural impact does not signify the quality of a book. Like, I think, I don't know, like, you have to kind of, like, read it for yourself to find out. Like, ACOTAR, like, I was like, wow, all these people are just horny and, like,
kind of bored.
So I'm just like, can you not, like, engage your mind in a more... So, like, that was an example of someone that wasn't approaching it with disinterestedness. And then I had someone that approached me with it we like sharing books, and I was very surprised she liked this. And I read it with low expectations, which I think is why I had such an amazing experience with the book series, is because I went in with so low expectations. Because I think objectively, ACOTAR, like... I think it's, like, a fine book. It's good. But it's, I don't know, like, and the writing isn't as bad as I felt like other books have been that have been just as popular. Because, like, we've talked about, like, Twilight as being one example, because objectively, like, the writing is not great. But culturally, like,
it did so
renewed the YA fiction genre.
Yeah. And ACOTAR renewed fantasy. Like, people now are just all up wanting to read different fantasy books. They each had such impressive positive cultural impacts that you can't just chuck it and say it was bad. Like, looking back at Twilight, again, at the time I read them, loved them, and was like, oh yeah, maybe they're not the best. Years later, looking back on it, I still have a fond heart for them. Like, I recognize, like, yeah, they're not great, but for what it did for me as a reader personally and what it did culturally, I can't say that it was bad, because it did good things.
Like, but that's the other thing too, is, like, just because it's getting everybody to read, does that mean it's a good thing?
That's true, because is it getting you to read good
is it
things
like the
or
yellow
bad
books
things?
Again?
Yeah,
like, is it the yellow books again, where it's like, wow, everyone's reading who weren't reading ever before, but they're just reading crap.
Yeah.
And, like, what does that mean? And so, like, even if it had this massive cultural impact and it was bad writing, like, was it a good thing in the long run? Like, even if it impacted so many. So that's, like, another dilemma that I think of. Because same thing with, like, Game of Thrones.
Oh, that's another huge one.
And, what is it called? Oh, shoot, what was it called? It was another book. 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh, yeah.
Like, those books are, like, so heavily circulated by everybody. And I'm sure, like, if we look at a historic lens, like, there are probably, like, magazines and books people loved because of, like, there was, like, a level of spiciness. Like, and by that I mean, like, smut and, like, things like that. Also, I didn't know what smut was for a long time. It just meant, like, sex scenes. So if anyone's listening to this and you don't know what that means in books, that's what it means. I didn't even know for a long time, and then I was like, oh, that's what they're talking about. But just to put that there, but people love those books, but objectively written, not the best. Not the best. And, like, they've been criticized for that, but yet, like, they did very well because, like, culturally people loved them. And could that mean that it was a good thing? But I do feel like ACOTAR generally, it was a positive experience people had, and it wasn't romanticizing unhealthy things. It was just a lot of people really liked fantasy and they really liked romance, and it was, like, very blended in that series. So
and I know some people who, we have a mutual friend, we were talking about ACOTAR, and ACOTAR opened up her world to other books. Like, she fell out of reading and then started reading ACOTAR and fell back in love with reading, and now she's reading all sorts of things. So I don't know.
And they're able to, like, read those and be like, it wasn't like this, it wasn't that good. Like, I don't know, I feel like it helped them be able to know, like, oh, this is what I want from books, you know?
Find your own taste and just have fun.
But I think generally, like, we're very excited to take a deep dive into ACOTAR together, like, reviewing, like, our personal reviews, and then, like, including, like, what have we seen other people have talked about, like, spoken about. We're excited to talk about, like, the characters, but I think mainly for this episode's sake, it really, like, I feel like I couldn't talk about ACOTAR or introduce it without bringing up what makes literature bad or good.
Especially, if you're not following us on Instagram, I've been posting my reactions of reading the book. And I I was watching the videos back. I use the term bad book or just bad in general a lot. And I do think it's very important to think about what does that even mean? And is it subjective? And should we listen to someone who says that? Or we really need to figure out personally what is a bad book.
Yeah.
And what do we like, what don't we like? What do we think is problematic? And just different things like that.
Like in our intro, this podcast, we talk about books we regret reading.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's because of like, I mean, it didn't do anything for us. Like, I have movies like that. Like the movie The Circle. I don't know if you
never watched it.
I watched it and I was like, that was a waste of like time, whatever hours. Like for me, some people might have really liked it. It was very Orwellian coded. And so I thought it would be good, but it really didn't make much sense. And it had like incredible actors in it. Which
was Emma Watson, right?
It had Emma Watson, Tom Hanks, John Boyega. Hey. It had a bunch of like incredible actors. But I was like, this didn't seem very well thought out. It just felt very confusing and I regretted it. And so like everyone kind of has to figure it out, but I do think there are some things generally as a community we need to agree on aren't good for the community because it romanticizes things that are just unhealthy and dangerous. But that also can be subjective where people, you know, like it's so hard.
We don't want to kink shame, but we kind of are.
Yes. Oof. Yeah. Sorry. Like I know so many people love dark romance, so we love you guys still.
If you're a consenting adult and you're fully aware of what's going on, go for it. But yeah, I always go back to it, and then I'm like, but everything else that we've said.
But if you're growing up and you think that that's okay,
not good.
No.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our 2 cents about that. But thank you so much for joining us today.
As always, put in the comments what you think. If you totally disagree with us, very respectfully, talk about it. Always go into all these conversations with respect and understanding. But we kind of want to hear. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Yeah. I think there was a question I had to, like, do you think it is better to read any book or should readers be more selective? Like, and also what are, like, examples of bad books to you and good books, I guess. I'm curious to see what you guys say.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening / watching. See you guys in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.